Today we'll take a detailed look at the performances of the U.S. national team in the CONCACAF Gold Cup and find out whether they are the main contenders for the title. The U.S. starts with a very interesting build-up from the back. The right-sided center back steps into the midfield zone, while the right fullback drops deeper and occupies the position of a right center back. You can clearly see this structure in the example here. In possession, the U.S. operates in a 4-3-3 shape during the first build-up phase. A triangle is formed in the midfield, consisting of the two holding midfielders and the right center back. The right winger drops deeper and stays wide, while the left winger plays more in the half space. Further up the pitch, when the U.S. settles into possession, they transition into a 3-2-5 structure. The back three consists of two center backs and the right back, who usually doesn't push as high as the left back. Two holding midfielders stay in front of the defense. Throughout the tournament, the U.S. hasn't been pressed aggressively by opponents high up the pitch. Typically, the U.S. progresses into the opposition half by creating triangles out wide. On the right side, those triangles are formed by the attacking midfielder, the holding midfielder, and the right winger. On the left flank, triangles are created by the left fullback, the holding midfielder, and the left winger. Here's an example of the 3-2-5 setup and how the U.S. lines up during possession phases. Occasionally, the right fullback takes the initiative, drives the ball into space, combines with the winger, and attacks the depth. These movements are rare, but they can be effective because the starting position is very deep, making it hard for the opposition to track these runs. The key players for the U.S. when transitioning from defense to attack are the holding midfielders. They handle pressure well, and the wide players are ready to drop deeper and narrow to help the build-up. Here's an example where the left back drops into a lower, more central position and receives the ball in the half space. The U.S. also uses diagonal passes effectively. The players maintain width, stretching along the touchline, making these diagonal balls a dangerous tool, especially to attack the depth. In this example, the U.S. number 10 receives a diagonal ball, beats his marker, and scores. The left winger often plays more centrally in the half space. Based on his profile, he's more of a number 10 style winger. In the final third, the U.S. typically attacks with at least 3 players inside the box, usually the central striker, a midfielder, and the opposite side winger arriving at the back post. The U.S. presses in a 4-4-2 shape, where 2 forwards initiate the press. One is the striker, the other is the attacking midfielder, who steps higher to form a front 2. One forward directs the press toward the wing, while the other cuts off passing lanes through the center of the pitch. It's a well-structured system. In this example, one forward forces play wide, while the second moves to block the central passing option. This creates compact pressure, closing down the opponents effectively. The main escape route for the opposition in this setup is a switch of play. As the central areas get blocked, the far side defender usually has lots of free space. Such switches can be dangerous for the U.S., as it's tough to immediately reorganize when playing with this pressing structure. It's also important to note the positioning of the far side winger. The winger on the side opposite to where the press is applied. He stays high to block passing lanes to the nearest center back. However, when that winger steps higher, free space may open on his flank, where the opposition fullback can easily receive the ball. Typically, in the opening phase of matches, when the U.S. still has fresh legs, they play very proactively. Both the right back and right center back push higher to follow their opponents, maintaining compact pressing. But we also see where the free spaces appear, especially diagonally, where the left winger often has to defend against up to 3 players at once, staying isolated from the rest of the structure. These are the moments where teams can exploit the U.S. setup. I also want to emphasize that the U.S. press really is compact. They try to close down opponents as a tight, organized block, as we can see in this example. But again, there's always space on the far side of the field, which opponents can exploit. The defenders themselves don't usually play very high. They tend to stay more conservative and don't always cover space properly. In this moment, the U.S. is defending in a 4-4-2 block. The right fullback steps out to press the player receiving the ball, which in itself is the right decision. But between the right fullback and the right center back, there's a 17-meter gap. That's plenty of space for an opponent to make a run into. This highlights that the center backs can be proactive, but they aren't aggressive enough in compensating for those wide spaces, choosing instead to stay compact centrally to avoid large gaps. That's another area where the U.S. can be exposed. Another major weakness in the U.S. defense is their tendency to shift almost the entire defensive line heavily towards the side where the ball is. Look at this defensive line of 4 players. It's easy to see how drastically they overcommit toward the ball side flank. As a result, the far side often remains completely unmarked, and an opponent could theoretically find themselves one-on-one with the goalkeeper. Here, for example, the left fullback has drifted so centrally that the entire wide area is left unoccupied. Even if the ball is switched to that flank, there's no guarantee the fullback will react proactively to close down the space, as he's currently responsible for marking an opponent running into the central channel. That too is an area where the U.S. can be caught out. The clearest demonstration comes in this moment. The entire U.S. defensive line shifts toward their left-hand side because the ball is on that flank. A Saudi Arabian player then plays a long, slightly awkward diagonal switch. Immediately, we see a 2 versus 1 overload on the far side for Saudi Arabia. Once again, because the entire U.S. defensive structure has been dragged toward the ball side, the Saudi player simply lets the pass run through, and we can see just how much open space his teammate has to attack. This huge gap is a clear scoring opportunity, and Saudi Arabia could have easily capitalized here. Another defensive problem arises during the U.S.'s transition from attack to defense. Sometimes the defenders hold their line around midfield rather than pushing higher to compress the space. When the midfielders have stepped up and the defenders fail to cover the gap behind, these spaces can trigger dangerous counterattacks. This means opponents can receive the ball facing the U.S. goal with time and space to accelerate the attack. Not everyone manages to recover quickly. Most players simply sprint back toward goal to defend the penalty area, leaving the holding midfield zone vulnerable. Another key weakness for the U.S. is their decision-making on the ball. It can often be slow and flawed. Take this moment. A decent first pass from the defender into space between the lines, an area where the ball can be comfortably received. There are 2 good receiving options, the left back and the left winger positioned in the half space, but neither player moves into that area to receive the ball. Instead, the pass bypasses the midfield and is played into deeper space. In this situation, receiving between the lines would have been far more effective, improving the attack's quality significantly. Instead, the striker collects the ball out wide, isolated, with no presence in the penalty area. He's facing away from goal, so the attacking move loses its threat. The U.S. midfield also lacks verticality at times. Look here, the right back receives the ball, and both available options make runs into the exact same area. Ideally, the central midfielder should attack the depth, especially as there's a gap between the opponent's fullback and center back. It's a perfect moment to exploit that space, allowing the U.S. right back to play a first-time through ball. In another situation, U.S. right back Alex Freeman receives the ball. Let's think about what he should do here. Logically, there's free space in the half-space area. He can easily carry the ball forward there without pressure. He could also play a simple backward pass, which would be a safe decision. But instead, he decides to play like he's a top-class player, driving straight into the middle, into a cluster of opponents. Why is this decision wrong? From a confidence perspective, you might call it positive. But from a game understanding standpoint, it's a major mistake. He dribbles directly into 4 Saudi Arabian players. Behind him, there are only 2 U.S. defenders, one of whom isn't even in position to defend properly. He's too wide near the flank. So, if Freeman loses the ball here, which he does, it immediately creates a dangerous 3 versus 1 counterattack toward the U.S. goal. This is the type of detail that reveals the true level of a player's football IQ and decision-making. The 2 U.S. holding midfielders are positioned higher up the field and aren't ready to defend in transition, which is fine based on the structure. But Freeman's poor decision creates unnecessary risk by dribbling into traffic. After losing the ball, Saudi Arabia nearly exploits the situation with a 3 versus 2 counterattack, only missing the decisive final pass. Another example, the US player on the ball is completely unmarked with plenty of time and space. There's an obvious opportunity to attack the depth. Yet for a long time, nobody makes a run into that space. In this episode, the striker should have made a run in behind, offering himself as an option, but he didn't. Next moment, the US number 10. He receives the ball perfectly between the lines. His first touch is forward. Excellent. There's a clear passing option to the striker, but he ignores it. Instead, he tries to play more creatively, more aggressively, attempting a risky pass straight into the opponent's penalty area. But realistically, what are the chances of that pass succeeding? Especially with his right foot. It's almost impossible to deliver that kind of pass accurately with the right foot from this position. Also, look at where the intended runner is. He's too far, with little chance to reach the ball. But the number 10 still takes the risk, plays the pass, and unsurprisingly, it doesn't go through. Maybe it would have been smarter to play a simpler ball. It wouldn't have been as dangerous, but at least your teammate gets the ball inside the opponent's box and you maintain possession. Next moment, the US number 14. He also finds space beautifully between the lines, receives the ball with a forward touch. The US number 24, the striker, starts running into the depth, a perfect opportunity for a through ball. You simply couldn't ask for a better scenario, but the number 14 hesitates, delays the pass, and loses possession. Once again, great initial movement, depth run, a clear goal-scoring opportunity. But poor decision-making and hesitation ruins the moment. Here's another situation. The US builds from defense to attack with 3 quick passes, beautifully executed. A line-breaking pass, a one-touch combination, a forward carry. Then again, a chance to exploit the depth and punish the opponent. But here, the technical quality isn't good enough. The final pass is misplaced and the opportunity fades. Now let's talk about set pieces. During attacking free kicks, the US lines up 5 players across the opponent's penalty area. One player deliberately positions himself in an offside position to distract defenders and be ready for rebounds from a better angle. 2 players stay short, prepared for a quick combination. Most deliveries target the far post, with in-swinging crosses driven at a low trajectory. That's exactly how the US scored against Saudi Arabia. In defensive free kicks, the US defends with 7 players across the penalty area line. 1 player is positioned outside the box, ready to collect second balls. Another player stands in the wall, and 1 disrupts short play options. For attacking corners, the US doesn't stick to one consistent delivery pattern. They mostly look to target their tallest players. This could be the far post, near post, or the center of the penalty area, depending on who the delivery is aimed at. Defensively at corners, they use a mixed zonal approach. 4 players cover the penalty area line, positioned along the edge of the 6-yard box. 5 players mark man-to-man, with 1 player ready to cover short play options and shift wide if needed. However, the US sometimes forgets to cover the zone outside the penalty area, leaving opponents with the opportunity to collect the ball unmarked and even take a first-time shot. That wraps up our analysis of the US national team's first games in the CONCACAF Gold Cup group stage. We've broken down their game patterns, strengths, weaknesses, and how opponents can exploit their vulnerabilities. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe the US are real title contenders in this tournament? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for even more high-level football analysis.